Welcome, grave robbers and corpse gobblers, to the annual Day Screamcast. Brogan has been carried away by the beasts of the night, but I have still called up our duo of supernatural experts. The first is Will Berger, freelance game journalist, short story author, host of the Golden Weekly's fighting game tournament, and editor-in-chief of the worker-owned Skybox Critics. Our second slayer is Thomas Wilde, a veteran journalist of the industry for 20-plus years, with works found on sites like Bloody Disgusting, Hard Drive, and IGN, but not the Fire Note. That is a different Thomas Wilde. Hi guys, how you doing?
What's up?
F.E.A.R team moving in. Tango spotted. Engage.
You know, I don't think anybody actually says the words tango spotted in F.E.A.R.
No, they mostly just say, what the fuck?
Yeah, like, what the fuck is going on?
Much more staticky.
Point man, you are weapons free.
Do they ever actually call him Point Man in the game? Because I don't recall that, and I only know that from the Wikipedia synopsis.
I don't think they ever actually call him anything except that he is the Point Man. In the briefings they do. F.E.A.R Point Man will do this.
Okay.
But they talk about him like nobody really knows who he is. And I feel like to a certain extent that has to be deliberate given what you eventually learn.
Yeah, he's transferred into the squad like 2 weeks before the game starts, I think. So nobody knows who he is. And
Man of mystery, but we'll get into that. First, we're going to be talking about some more recent games we've been playing. Thomas, you're on that Ninja Gaiden 4 type stuff. Tell me about that.
To be clear, I'm doing the collectibles pages for the IGN guide for Ninja Gaiden 4, so I'm not really cracking as deeply into the combat system as I could be. But it's a pretty good example of a game that does one thing very well and pays lip service at best to everything else. Mm-hmm. The combat is pretty cool. Lots of opportunities to be creative with it, very intense. Even on hard difficulty, you will have a very difficult time with it unless you are willing to sit down, learn its rhythms, and figure things out. It's not just what some people would call parry slop. It's actually got a lot of sauce in it. But every level is basically just one big tunnel, which is a fair bit of... It's someplace for you to fight a giant pack of demons in. There are some kind of cool sequences where you surf along a flooded tunnel or a elevated train track or something, some kind of sweet skateboarding sequences of all things. But other than that, the game is 100% combat all the time. The story is just kind of there. I've known a lot of people who have issues with the voice acting. I don't think it's bad at all, to be honest with you. It's just that every character is the thinnest sketch of themselves you can possibly imagine.
Is that, like, par for the course for the franchise? I've never played a Ninja Gaiden, so I wouldn't know.
This is your great failing, honestly. I mean, they're not deep. Like, listen, I'll tell you that the character I am most invested in Ninja Gaiden 2 is Volf, Invincible Ruler of Storms, because he calls himself Volf, Invincible Ruler of Storms, in like this really gravelly voice. Okay. And he's like, he has this line about, he will be given an honorable death. And you're like, yes, this is the voice acting that I'm here for. Ninja Gaiden is amazing. This is on point.
Okay, it leans camp.
It's so campy. If like there are people who are like, I don't think the story was that good. And it's like, why do you hate, like, A, why do you hate camp? And B, why do you hate fun? Like, this is not supposed to be serious.
I wouldn't call Ninja Gaiden 4 campy. It's just sort of there. You don't have characters who are really playing up most of their individual quirks or really leaning into the idea that they live in some kind of manic ninja dystopia Japan where somebody killed a dragon above Tokyo 20 years ago and the city got abandoned thereafter. Honestly, though, I have to admit, as I played through the game, I did sort of want to see more games set in this creepy alternative demon-haunted Japan they've set up. But it's really just set dressing in which you can carve up demons and weird samurai black ops guys one at a time.
Okay, does it feel like Ninja Gaiden is back? Like they can move forward from this? Or does it kind of just feel like one of those 10 years later sequels that then has no follow-up?
I think it's as back as it wants to be. There's definitely some room for improvement or for moving forward here. I think that people who are big fans of the recent remakes or the original games will have a lot to go off of here. It's got an interesting gimmick that I kind of hope sneaks its way into a lot of other modern action games where as you fight, you generate this meter which you can use to turn on what they call Blood Raven mode and blow through an enemy's block. But it's very easy to run out of it in the middle of a combo. So it's not just a game where you sit around waiting for enemies to attack so you can counter. You have some ability to go on the offensive, which is something I always get really annoyed by with low-key Souls-likes. Or rather, indie Souls-likes, or the various equivalents thereof, like The Last Case of Benedict Fox or what have you. You spend so much time in those games just waiting for the flash so you can parry.
I think Will, you are famously on record saying you don't like when games make you play Simon Says.
Yes. I think based on very, very little of what I've played in Ninja Gaiden 4, I do have a copy that I was gifted. But I did play it at TGS, and one of the things that is interesting to me is that like when you use Blood Raven to interrupt, it's not the only answer. So it's not Simon Says in the to the effect that like there is an answer and you have to do this, but it also requires you to be like the problem with like parries and dodges is that you are playing very reactively, whereas like the way Ninja Gaiden 4 does it, when you use Blood Raven to break like an attack or a stance or whatever, it actually requires you to be proactive and see like, okay, this is starting up and I have to hit him right now. You are not waiting passively. You actually have to be aggressive to kind of take your turn back. And I think that's an interesting way to do it. And it's different enough that it feels unique. And I think it encourages the player to think about combat a little bit differently in a way that I think is interesting.
Yeah, I kind of started this thought and don't feel like I finished it in the Itagaki Memorial article we ran on Skybox. But sometimes I look back at the first two Itagaki Ninja Gaiden games and I think of them as this potential unexploited branch point for action gaming. I feel like those never got quite the attention they deserved. And so we were all set up for Demon Souls to come in and take action gaming in that incredibly reactive direction, as opposed to the Ninja Gaiden formula where if you don't go on the offensive, if you don't play aggressively, the enemies will eventually just thrash you. You are the disruptive element in Ninja Gaiden fights, and Ninja Gaiden 4 carries that forward quite well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. Even on defense, one of the things that I think is cool about Ninja Gaiden is it forces you to be even when you're blocking, right? Like usually the best answer is to block and then reverse wind, which is basically a dodge in a direction while you're holding block. I think what's really interesting is that action games have really started to penalize you for blocking if they even offer it as a move that you can do. And Ninja Gaiden does not do that. It rewards you for doing other things than blocking, but it recognizes that sometimes just guarding and waiting your turn is part of like the dance of the action game. And I wish more games had the wherewithal to be like, no, this is good, and we're not going to punish you for doing it. Because, in a Souls game, you can block, but it's like, cool, we're taking your stamina every time you do this. And if you block a move that we don't think you're supposed to be able to block, we will just crush your stamina bar, and you will have to sit there in this long-ass recovery animation while they destroy you. And Ninja Gaiden doesn't do that. So I think it's functionally like a different view of how combat should work. And to Thomas's point, I wish it had taken off more, which is funny at the time because action game sickos were all over Ninja Gaiden, right? 1 and 2 are still, I think, pretty highly regarded. If you ask any action game fan, like, oh, what are the greatest action games of all time? Ninja Gaiden Black is going to be in the top 3 if they know what they're talking about. And then Ninja Gaiden 2 is going to be like that combat system, though. Like, we don't quite like the other things as much because it's famously like not finished and polished to where it could have been. But I think, if that game is a little bit better, if Tecmo pays Itagaki his bonus money and they finish that game the way that they were going to finish that game before he just kind of threw his hands up and left the company, we would be talking about action games in a very different way, and I think potentially a more interesting way as opposed to dodge, roll, parry, which is...
Yeah, I think that speaks to how, if you think about it, with any given media, there are 2 audiences for it, so to speak. One is fans and the other is other creators. And with the first couple of Ninja Gaiden games in particular, they have a pretty strong audience of fans to this day, even considering how hard they were to play for a little while there. But they didn't get as much attention from other creators as you'd think they would. And as such, for the last however long it's been since Ninja Gaiden 2, not counting Razor's Edge, it's been this dead branch point in action game design. And now I think Ninja Gaiden 4 has done a fairly good job of going back and seeing what worked about it, what didn't work about it, and going its own way. It definitely doesn't feel quite the same, but at the same token, it does take all the right inspirations thereof. Although, one thing, going back to your point about blocking, it is kind of funny the sheer amount of stuff you were allowed to block in Ninja Gaiden 4. Especially as you get towards the end of the game, your character can block up to 9 bullets in a row with his swords. You can block being swatted by an enormous giant. You can block being bitten by a hell shark.
Well, that's just cool sounding. Okay.
It's like a running gag that all he really has to do is hold his sword up across his torso and just about anything will glance off. If a planet killer asteroid hits the world is headed towards the world of Ninja Gaiden 4, Yakumo will simply block it.
And knock it off course.
Yeah, it's an interesting, like, kind of fork in the road for action game design, and it's like, I think it's also really good at like, Ninja Gaiden is good at teaching you how to play other action games, like what the thought process is going to be, and that's not true for every action game. Devil May Cry teaches you how to play Devil May Cry, but Ninja Gaiden is very much like right, here are your tools, learn what your tools do, and then figure out how to use them. And it's also a game that's very built on not always patience, because sometimes you do have to move very quickly and make split-second decisions, but it does encourage you to not just do things for the sake of doing things, like to be very precise, to be very patient, to pick what you want to do for the situation and not just spam a dodge or, go for a parry all the time. Like, it really incentivizes you to figure out what the best way to do something is and then play that way against whatever enemy is causing you to do it. And it's crazy that there's still really nothing else like it. Like, Platinum doesn't make games that way, really, even if they, could develop Ninja Gaiden 4. Capcom doesn't make action games that way. It was really just the way Itagaki looked at that, and the Team Ninja looked at it and said, okay, we're going to build a game that plays this way, and nobody else is really attempting to.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there was an audience for that kind of deliberately challenging gameplay. And then the Souls games came along and kind of stole that entire audience out from underneath everybody. Which I could have done without, because I don't like Souls games.
Well, speaking of games that suddenly got a revival, in this case, 20 plus years later, Will, you've been playing the new Painkiller?
Yeah. It's not really Painkiller. I feel like I should just get that out of the way.
I figured from the fact that it's 20 years later.
I think it's important to note that the original Painkiller, which is dope as hell. Did get a couple of in-name only sequels, but if I remember correctly, they were made by like college intern groups within the larger company, and none of them.
Is this like a Zombie 2 through 5 are all sequels to Night of the Living Dead situation?
Look, motherfucker, it's the Halloween episode, and you will not besmirch Lucio Fulci's name right now.
I wasn't besmirching. I was acknowledging.
So it's really funny because like the original Painkiller was developed by People Can Fly, and that game rules. Like it's an amazing shooter. And then it got several expansions, and then it got a remake, sequel in Painkiller Hell and Damnation, about 13 years ago, from some of the guys who made some of the expansions for the original game. And it's Painkiller's, you know, like every decade or so, someone's like, we can make Painkiller work, who are not People Can Fly, and it's like, no, you really can't. Although the remake sequel isn't bad. It's not the original game, but it's certainly not bad. But this game is basically Painkiller in name only. So you know those co-op games where like you play a little intro level and then you have 4 characters that you can choose from when you're dropped in like a hub where you can, you know, upgrade your weapons, maybe read a little bit of lore, and you know there's like you can take this special power-up thing out on runs with you, and then you go into a portal and you get taken to a level and you play the level and you go back to the thing. And there's like a lot of shit for you to shoot.
like a Vermintide thing.
It is literally Vermintide flavored. Like it is Painkiller in name only. It is Painkiller flavored Vermintide. It's really, I guess, closer to Darktide because it's guns. It feels nothing like the original game. And it's yeah.
Well, I get so what I only know Painkiller very like loosely. So what does being Painkiller flavored actually like mean in this context? Does it feel more, are they doing like a reboot, or is this like actually intending to continue the story?
It does not continue the story. As far as I can tell, and I've basically finished it. I have like 2 more levels to play. The story is basically like there's these 4 people, they're in purgatory, and it's like, cool, there's a demon doing this stuff that this angel wants you to stop. You got to go kill like this horde of enemies that are between you and whatever the demon wants to do. And it's, you just do that a lot. But
is it compelling though?
Not really. It's the funny thing is like it plays well. Like it does feel good. It has really good, it has like a slide that feels really good, and you have an air dash. You have like, you can like wall kick off the stuff to get higher. So the movement is really quite good, but it has the problem that basically every game like this has, which is, you know, you're basically walking forward until you get to a room, and the room is like, kill all the enemies, you know, and there's waves of them, right? So you just kill them all. And then you go to the next area, and it's like, you need to stop this device. Kill the enemies while they're next to this barrel, and then put the barrel in the thing, you know, or activate this thing by standing on it. Like, it's very...
Feels rote.
It's very rote. It's like every Destiny 1 mission, if that was a whole video game, aside from Destiny 1. And like, there's really nothing to it. Like, there's a ton of enemies, but none of them are particularly dangerous except for like a couple elite enemies, and they like the bosses at the end of each act. It has 3 acts. There's like just a lot of little dudes, and you just murder them like really, really efficiently. And it's, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really have much story. It's just like these 4 characters who talk like discount Josh Whedon characters.
A little quippy.
Yeah, they're quippy. You know, they're like, ho ho ho, like, and it's like, okay, but like the reason we liked Josh Whedon's dialogue was it was clever. And everybody who wants to be Josh Whedon has not figured out how to be clever or endearing with it. They're just kind of irritating. So I don't know. Like, on the one hand, like, I think it plays well, but I think the mission design is really boring, except for the boss fights. I don't think the characters are that interesting. Like, there's some neat stuff about them, I guess, but it's just, it feels like a game that was getting made, and then the people who were making it were like, we have the Painkiller rights.
Yeah.
If we just slapped that on top of this, like, discounting the fact that basically nobody knows what Painkiller is anymore because it's old, right? The original game is 21 years old. It's old. The kids don't know Painkiller, but it's...
Yeah, go ahead and talk a little bit more about how old it is. Thanks, that's really helping me.
You're welcome. Listen, I hate to be that guy, but, like, the kids don't know what Painkiller is, right? Like, so you play it and you're like, who is this for? Because clearly it's for people who like these kind of co-op games, but I will bet you money that basically none of those people know what Painkiller is. It's not for Painkiller fans because it doesn't feel like Painkiller. So it's like, what is this? I don't know. It's not a bad game, but it is the most nothing video game I've ever played in my life.
Looking at gameplay, it looks like they're actually trying to cop some of the Warframe crowd a bit. The problem is that the Warframe crowd are very addicted to Warframe, and I don't think they don't perceive other video games.
It's also that problem, right? Where it's that thing where it's like, you have to, if you're going to convince people to buy, to stop playing the thing that they like, right, and switch to your thing has to be notably better than the thing that they already like, and it's not. And so, it's funny, every genre is basically having the MMO problem right now, especially anything that has a live service game. Like in, the mid-aughts where everyone was like, we can make an MMO that will get WoW money, and it's like, cool. Everybody is playing WoW, a game that they like. How are you going to convince them to switch to your game that they haven't played, that they don't know if they're going to like or not, that maybe their friends aren't playing, that doesn't have all the stuff that they've already dumped time into, and at a certain point just is not going to have as much content as World of Warcraft because it's not as, it's new, right? And World of Warcraft has expansions. And the answer is, we're going to make a game that's kind of like World of Warcraft, but it has this other, like, frosting on the cake, and it's how are you going to convince them? It'll be fine. It's that, I don't know if anybody saw this, but there was this thing with one of the Amazon guys was on LinkedIn and posting about, like, how they were trying to get people to buy games on, like, Twitch or something and not Steam. And it was like, we failed to realize the problem, which was that people already have Steam and like it. Why would they switch to our platform? It's like, yes, why? Exactly. Why would they? And nobody has an answer. They just think if they throw enough money at it, it will magically happen. And it never does.
It is fascinating looking at Amazon's gaming ambitions. As I've mentioned on the old pod before, I do a lot of work for GeekWire here in Seattle, which covers local news. And as their gaming correspondent, I've covered a lot of Amazon's recent attempts to break into the video game industry. And for about 90% of it, every decision they've made has been within a complete cultural vacuum. It's actually kind of incredible. Like how New World, the MMO, which I believe is in an action RPG reinvention period right now, but the original release was apparently some kind of dispatch from an alternate reality where World of Warcraft's first expansion never came out. Like, it's trying to beat WoW, but on the assumption that it just classic WoW.
Burning Crusade never happened. Nothing has ever happened. It's just vanilla WoW. That's so funny.
Yeah, they just showing up to a fight with everything in their corner 16 years late.
Yeah, there was some MMO round about 2013 or so that had like a big YouTuber push. It was like some sci-fi thing with like a Pixar art style. I can't remember. There was like space squirrels. But its main thing was like, it's basically vanilla WoW. And it was like shut down after a month.
WildStar?
WildStar, that was it.
Damn, I forgot WildStar existed. That's crazy.
It's weird you bring that up. I was randomly thinking of a Penny Arcade strip about WildStar earlier today because I was looking into the housing developments in World of Warcraft. They're going to give you your Animal Crossing minigame in the next expansion. And WildStar did that. So it is very strange that I have thought about WildStar twice in 1 week in 2024.
That's synchronicity.
Speaking of Painkiller, as a boomer shooter guy, I would like to say that if you are interested in something which plays comparably to the original Painkiller, there is a indie shooter called Dread Templar, which is very much in the same vein. And yeah, and the Project Warlock games are pretty good in that general direction too. It's very fast-paced first-person shooters with a lot of ability to customize your arsenal and just enough challenge to keep things interesting.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah, so I don't know. If you have like 2 other friends, because it's 3-player co-op, like, and you are super into the aesthetic of Painkiller and not actually Painkiller, maybe try the new Painkiller. But if you are not into those things, it gets progressively harder to recommend, because it just isn't, like I said, it is the most nothing video game I've ever played. I don't know what the appeal of it is, like, other than, I guess, while you're playing it, like, it's like eating a bag of chips. Like, it tastes fine and you'll just keep eating them because they're there, but I don't know. It's not the worst video game I've ever played for money. It's not the best video game I've ever played for money. It is definitely one of the video games of 2025, and yeah.
Well, all right. Let's see if I can kick things up a bit, because I'm back again to talk about Voices of the Void. I previously talked about this game last year in our Sly 2 episode with Acer Aesthetics, and I came back to it this Halloween because I've been sitting and thinking to myself constantly, like, man, I wish there was a horror game like Blank, or just like a game like Blank, and then I realized that game exists and it's called Voices of the Void. This game is still in pre-alpha. Last time I played it was 0.6. This is 0.8. It actually, jokes on me, because when I was installing it, I learned that the 0.9 update comes out on Halloween. For people that don't know what this game is, you are a researcher sent to a remote, like, satellite array in the mountains of Scandinavia, and your job is to scan the stars looking for outer space signals. You are the only person on this base. You have a small little building that you live in and you do your work out of, and then the entire range of 26 satellites. It's a huge map. And when you get there, the place is completely empty, but the base is filled with trash, and you just kind of set about your work. It's done in the source engine, and it gives the player a lot of flexibility to just kind of fuck about. The actual act of scanning the stars for signals is slow. Oftentimes you'll find a signal, ping it, and then you have to wait for the satellites to turn to it. And then you have to download the signal, and that takes time. And depending on your boss's wants, you have to update that signal so that it cleans out some of the static and you can hear it better. And those all take, like, in-game time, and that just leaves you free to kind of go do whatever. Like I said, the base is a mess, so you can clean up some of that trash, bag it up, and send it out for money. But during those moments of downtime is when you'll start to see, let's just say, weird shit. Because there are about, I think it's at this point, like 150 different events that can occur any in-game day. And these range from supernatural to outer space flavored. Of this new save, my first night there, I was setting up my workstation, trying to remember how the controls work, and I look outside the big window outside the office space and see a pair of floating eyes just watching me. And anytime I set my cursor on the eyes, they turned red and started banging against the glass. And it's just... And then eventually those eyes went away. A lot of the events don't really have, like, payoff or lore or anything like that. Sometimes you'll come in the base and you'll hear knocking in the vents. You can go up in the vents if you can find the way in, but there's no one actually in the vents. It's just kind of to set you at, like, unease. And as you progress, you start to do more little daily tasks. Your boss will send you out to fix the satellites, or you'll go out to, like, take pictures of the environment and stuff, but all that takes pretty quick time to finish, and again, you're just left to your own devices. Because this is just an itch.io game in the source engine, the devs have given you free reign to like import your own assets in the form of posters, paintings, flags. You can buy a 3D printer and print Blender models as figurines and statues to decorate your base with, which can get haunted. And just over time, I don't know, the headspace this game puts me in, where I'm doing my silly little tasks, I'm trying to find things to fill the time with, and then every now and again, something just happens that causes me to jump at my own shadow. It's weirdly compelling in a way I've never seen any other horror game do. Right now, with the current update and with the 0.9 update, they're kind of bringing in more of what they're calling the story mode, where on set days, certain events will happen, and you'll gradually be encountering like the 3 main alien races that are gradually going to fuck with you as time goes on. The first batch of aliens are these, well, no easy way to say it. They're 10-foot tall cat girls, but they're invisible most of the time.
I'm learning so much about Murph right now in this moment.
No, look.
Before you start trying to defend yourself particularly well, you should know that we all heard your neurons activate the moment you said cat girl.
No, look, I'm allergic to cats in real life. I hate these guys because they fuck with me constantly. Mainly what they'll do is, because they know you're listening to space, they'll like just set up little alien pranks. Like they'll set up a paper mache like gray alien on a wooden cart and roll it past your window while it's playing a recording of like some alien screeching. Or sometimes they'll drag your bed outside and into the parking lot while you're sleeping in it. Or they'll turn off gravity. And one time I was out on my regular patrol and I found they had set up a little tree house in the forest. And in that tree house was something that looked kind of like a mini fridge, and I said to myself, I want that. And when I tried to pick it up, it pushed me away, an alarm went off, and one of the invisible cat girls started chasing me with intent to slap my shit. I ran back to my base, locked the door, and was watching the door from the window, and I saw it come up, and I was like, well, good thing I locked the door, it can't come in. It punched in the entry code, then came in and threw a brick at me, and then went away. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, this doesn't sound very horrifying, it sounds more silly than anything. That's because that's the first alien race you meet. I'm now in the second phase of the game, where the aliens are glowing termites that float above the ground and can no-clip through walls, and if they catch you, they will methodically rip off your limbs one by one. And so now I am actually living in the vents of my office, only coming out every now and again to do my work so I can get paid for the day. And then I retreat back into the vents, watching my radar cautiously for if anything's coming by. Like I said, the game is just weirdly open-ended and establishes this sense that you don't know what's going to happen next. Eventually you get used to the aliens, you get used to the weirdness, but then one time out in the woods, a fully modeled Toyota Corolla hatchback spawned and started rolling at me. And it's not evil, it's not like Christine, it's just a Toyota hatchback that you can drive from that point forward.
This is kind of reminding me of Pacific Drive in a couple of ways. Not the invisible cat girls who torment you, but the generally nattering about around in a world which is out to be a little bit weird and unnerve you more than it is an active horror experience.
Yeah, I've heard comparisons to Pacific Drive.
Oh, Thomas, you don't remember the invisible cat girls in Pacific Drive?
You know, I was seeing invisible cat girls in every game for a while there, but then I got back on Alexa Pro and it was cool.
I've also heard comparisons to Dredge, where you have this daily job that kind of feels reminiscent of a cozy game, like a supermarket sim, but there's just supernatural stuff happening off in the distance, and you can go engage with that, or you can never look at it at all and just do your cozy game time. The base comes with a radar that will update you anytime there's like a new entity detected, and it will give you the coordinates, and you can head out there. And sometimes it's nothing, sometimes it's a deer, sometimes it's just like a tree fell over, and then other times it's a mechanical spider that screams at you. But you know, maybe you don't want to go out that night. Maybe you just want to sit in your base and listen to space for a while. You can buy TVs in the in-game store and load in MP4s that you can watch on them. So now I get the experience of role-playing like the security guard in a horror movie, where I'm just watching last night's game with my comically large donut, and then I hear a sound and turn down the volume and go, what was that? You know? It's just, there's just nothing like this game, and I'm very interested to see how it evolves when it's like fully finally released. But if you're not looking for anything new out in the void, you can make do with old. Thomas, you have been playing that there Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection.
Yeah, that's for another IGN guide. I'm doubling up on my wiki moderation right now. First off, I think it's important to say that Atari is publishing this for some reason, and they are charging $50 for it, which is insane.
Atari is publishing this?
Yeah.
Yeah, Atari owns Digital Eclipse, and Digital Eclipse put the
Eclipse
backing
is the
together.
developer.
Oh, okay.
And I can see why somebody would want to play something like Mortal Kombat 2 on NetPlay in 2025. And I know that South America in particular still has a huge Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 scene to this day. I may not particularly understand that, but I've seen enough Fightcade tournaments for it that I know that it's a big deal. But even then, $50 seems like just too much for a bunch of games, which the newest one is 21 years old.
Okay.
What is the newest one? 4?
They have the really deeply weird port of Deadly Alliance for the Game Boy Advance.
Oh yeah,
but not Deadly Alliance on its own.
No.
Yeah, they don't have they don't have the PS2 or Xbox versions of it yet. They just have the Game Boy Advance one, which came out effectively in 2 parts. There's one part that has half the cast in it, and there's one part that has the
like
other
a Pokemon
half.
Red and Blue kind of thing?
A little bit, yeah. And if I remember correctly, without looking, both versions have Shang Tsung, Quan Chi, and Scorpion, but the actual Deadly Alliance port has half the cast, and there's one called Mortal Kombat Tournament Edition that has the other half of the same cast.
Looking at this lineup, like it's original Mortal Kombat, you got the arcade, the SNES, the Genesis version, the Game Boy version, and the Game Gear version. And it's kind of reminding me of that Tetris collection that they put out, I think it was end of last year, Tetris Forever, where it's like, yeah, you have 20 different versions of Tetris, but do I need that, though? Because Tetris is one of those games where you kind of only need one version.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that they're rescuing these obscure ports from history's dustbin and putting them on here. There's no reason not to. And just for historical preservation, it's worthwhile. They have really high definition scans of all of the original manuals for the console ports in the package, which is kind of cool. A lot of them have... it's really hard to find now, but there used to be this comic book that John Tobias, one of the co-creator of Mortal Kombat, drew. And I think he wrote it too. But there's a official John Tobias comic book for the first 2 Mortal Kombat games, and there is a bunch of art from it in all of the manuals for the original Mortal Kombat's console ports. So it's just kind of cool to see those. It's also where you get the original biographies of the first 7 Mortal Kombat characters, which shows off a bunch of interesting broken plot branches they never really did anything with, like Kano was originally half Japanese until the 1995 movie came out. They cast an Australian guy as Kano in that, and then from there on after, every version of Kano in the games was Australian.
Mm-hmm. That's true legacy and power.
Yeah, or just stuff like Johnny's ex-wife didn't appear until MK1, but she's in the MK bio page. I think she has a different name, but Johnny being divorced is still like ancient MK lore they never did anything with until 2023.
Is the version of Sub-Zero Mythologies the one with the FMV cutscenes?
It's the original PlayStation cut, so yeah, I would imagine. I haven't played it
Okay.
yet. I tried playing Special Forces, but that game controls like mud.
Yeah, much like Sub-Zero Mythologies.
I remember hearing that it's easier to play that on the N64 version, and the reviewer's guide I was given says there's going to be a lot of post-launch support for this, so I think I'm going to hold out and see if the N64 version's a little easier to play.
So I guess, I mean, with these kind of collections we've been getting recently, like the Atari collections and the stuff Capcom's putting out, kind of more of the appeal is in that, like, museum artifact sensibility. Does this game at least fulfill that with all, like, the additional assets they throw in?
Oh yeah, there's been a lot of attention paid to throwing in whatever they can to put in, lots of quality of life adjustments. You can do fatality tutorials all the arcade games. There's an option that you can just toggle on stuff like the combat codes. For example, the blood code on the Genesis version of the original game.
Okay.
And I'll be the first one to tell you that I have a lot of baked-in nostalgia for Mortal Kombat. I don't think any of the games are particularly good, but I grew up in the Chicagoland area in the 90s, and so any convenience store or arcade or bar or movie theater that had a spare electrical outlet had an MK machine. So as much as I don't care for the games now, I know a lot about the characters. I've watched a fair bit of the transmedia stuff, and I played a lot of MK2 in high school. Mm-hmm. So I am, to a certain extent, in the audience for this. I think it's too expensive, but they really have put together a nice package.
Yeah, I just can't. You're right. That $50 price tag is kind of hard to negotiate for something not necessarily this specific. I'm trying to think of the word here. It's much more to the interest of like a collector or someone who's really crazy about Mortal Kombat, which I am not. I do like it from a preservation angle, I guess, but again, looking at the game list, it kind of feels like they included more weird stuff than, I guess, like mainline stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely seems like they could have done more with it well, actually, it feels more along the lines that they might have had more ambitious plans for it and simply ran out of time, which would be very much in keeping with modern WB's approach to Mortal Kombat. It would make a certain amount of sense if their original blueprint would have been, we're going to put the first 5 games in here in all of their various versions, and then we'll be good, but they simply did not have the time to do everything they wanted to do. For example, it feels weird that Mortal Kombat 4 is in here, but not MK4 Gold or anything like that. The MK Trilogy version in here is just the PlayStation version and not the distinctly different N64 version.
Okay. I didn't even know that came out on N64.
That's the version I played. The N64 version has a couple of interesting quirks to it because here's something that I only know because I'm ancient. The PlayStation versions of MK3, UMK3, and Mortal Kombat Trilogy had to change Shang Tsung because in order to use his morph ability, because back in the day in MK2 and MK3, Shang Tsung could change freely into any other member of the cast if you knew the right button command. which is how you could do some really degenerate combos if you wanted to. But in the CD-ROM versions of the game, they couldn't do that because it would freeze the game for a second while it pulled the data of the new character off the disc. So I think the Saturn version had the same problem. But so Shang Tsung could only change into his opponent in the CD-ROM versions of the game. In the N64 version of Trilogy, he could freely change into whoever he wanted.
Okay.
Because it was a cartridge, so there was no attendant load time.
Well, I have a question, as you are a fighting games man.
Yeah.
So, like, when Capcom put out their, like, Legacy Collection and their Marvel Collection, we immediately saw those games get, like, either, like, main stage at EVO or one of the side stages. Is there, like, any capacity that would happen with these older Mortal Kombat games?
I think there's definitely a chance that some of them see some resurgence in the tournament scene. Like, maybe UMK3, MK2, you know, the ones that are still played like at a professional level. But I think like the MK scene moves on pretty quickly. You know, they get a new one like every 2 years. So I don't know. We'll see. It would be interesting to see it. I'm not quite sure. It would be cool.
Yeah.
It would be cool to see MK3 played competitively again, like on a big stage, something like that. But it's hard to say. You know, Marvel 2 and Marvel 3 have such a long running competitive history that seemed more like an easy thing to do, you know?
Because there's still, like, legacy players that would come back for that.
Exactly. And it's harder to say if that's going to be the case with something like this.
What if in, like, 3 years they do the Legacy Collection 2, and that has Mortal Kombat versus DC in it, and that's main stage at EVO?
That would be hilarious, but one of the things that nobody remembers about MK versus DC is it has a bona fide god tier.
Go on.
So one of the things which is interesting about MK versus DC is that it's this early version of a lot of the systems that they'd go on to use in MK9, MK10, and MK11. So it's got breakers, and it's got this thing called Rage where you can enter a short-lived power-up period. And Green Lantern and Flash can both combo off their breaker, so they can hit you for a 45% damage combo if you hit them.
I see. Okay. They really take back their turn.
Yeah, and the unpatched launched version of MK vs. DC, Superman had a one-button infinite.
Mm-hmm. That game was played for money.
I don't know if it was.
Somewhere it was. There was money exchanged. There was money that exchanged hands at some point for MK versus DC. I
would be
guarantee it.
very surprised if MK versus DC was played for anything more than like chicken.
What?
Like I will buy you dinner if you win.
I see.
This set.
Okay. Not like you get 3 chickens in a bag of grain.
But yeah, I remember distinctly talking with people about it because there are still corners of the internet which are pretty hardcore about MK as a general rule. There are people who will argue about like the tier list in MK Armageddon, that sort of thing. As a matter of fact, it would probably make more sense if the next Legacy Collection was just Deadly Alliance, Deception, and Armageddon, because that's kind of a trilogy by itself. With Armageddon being every character that had appeared in Mortal Kombat up to that point, including one-shot only like Kai and Fujin. But MK versus DC was... it's interesting. It's not as hard as people... Well, I'm sorry. It's not as difficult to like as people will portray it as now. But it does have this very low skill ceiling at which it is no longer fun because some of the characters are just terribly broken, and some of the characters are not a lot of fun to play. There's kind of this sweet spot in its mid-tier where it's fun again. But if you decide to fall into bad company and find yourself a local scene for MK versus DC, you are allowed to hit anybody who plays Green Lantern or Flash with a bike chain.
Okay, I mean, you're clearly from the streets. You know these rules. All right, well, I think that'll wrap up our first segment. Let's move on to the Variety Minute. And our Variety Minute for this episode is just fairly straightforward. We're going to throw out some horror game recommendations for you listeners out there, should you want to game on your Halloween Eve. But also, we are going to try and determine what next year's Scream Team game should be. Now, would anyone want to float out something there to start with?
I'm pretty sure I picked F.E.A.R, so I think Thomas should go first.
I was going to say, I just talked for a long time, so if you wanted to go.
All right. Well, I'll throw out. I know originally when we started this bit of doing annual Halloween episodes, back in the Fatal Frame 2 episode, we said it was going to be Eternal Darkness and then Illbleed. And I still kind of feel doing Illbleed just because I love that game because it's weird. But I feel we've also gotten kind of locked in doing 6th and 7th gen console titles. And maybe there's stuff a little more recent or even older to look at. If we're looking at recent and older fused together, I will always suggest people play Faith. The Faith the Unholy Trilogy, which is done as a sort of satanic panic haunted Atari game. That was my game of the year for 2023, and I still go back to it each Halloween since to play through it.
You know, if we're gonna do that, then I saw a piece of fan art on Tumblr, which I thought was pretty funny, that made the point that viewed through a certain lens, County. I'm sorry, is it Crow County or Crow Country? Suddenly I can't.
I think it's Crow Country.
Crow Country.
Okay. Crow Country is sort of a spiritual sequel to Illbleed because they're both about girls with purple hair exploring an abandoned amusement park.
I can get that influence. I really get that influence. Yeah. Yeah.
So I can throw one down for that. That's a good game.
Also on my list here, if only because Bro and I have been talking about doing an episode on this game on our own, and I know Will brings it up from time to time, but I'd be really curious to do my first playthrough of Dead Space 2, because I hear that may fix some of the issues I had with the first one.
Dead Space 2 is an amazing pick, and it's a great choice. I know this is of that era that we seem to be stuck in, but one game that I think from like a horror perspective I wish more people had played is The Suffering.
I don't know that one.
Suffering is pretty cool. I don't know how Thomas feels about it, but I think it's pretty neat.
I like the first one a lot more than the second, but yeah, it's a pretty good game.
What's the pitch? Give me the lowdown.
So The Suffering is about a guy who is sent to prison for may or maybe not like murdering his family, as I recall. It's been a hot second since I've played The Suffering. And he's on death row. He's sentenced to prison for murdering his ex-wife and his 2 kids. He claims he blacked out. And then like the prison gets attacked by this race of supernatural creatures. And
Are they invisible cat girls?
They are not. He has to get out. And it's interesting because your choices during the game actually change what he did or did not do prior to like being imprisoned. So it's interesting. It was made by the team at Surreal Software. It was a midway release. Surreal also made Draken, if anybody's familiar with that. And the Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship with the Ring, the one that nobody likes before they made the sequels that kind of became like cult classics from that era. They only made a few games. The Suffering is probably their most famous game. It's an action horror game. It's not as scary as some other stuff, but I do think it's really interesting and very unique. There's really nothing else quite like it, so Suffering's pretty cool. It's also easy to get. It's on Good Old Games.
Yeah, the designer on the Suffering is a guy named Richard Rouse III, who is still active in the Seattle indie scene. I've talked to him a couple of times. He's usually at PAX West. And a few years ago, he put out a game which you can definitely see the connective tissue between it and the Suffering. The game is called The Church in the Darkness. And it's about going to the South American jungle in the 70s to rescue your character's nephew from a cult. But the gimmick is that every element of the story is randomly generated the moment you start the game, so you never get the same path through it twice. Sometimes the cult is genuinely an apocalyptic horrorscape with some terrible rules and your nephew really wants to leave. Sometimes they are well-meaning people and you're the disruptive element. Sometimes the biggest problem the cult has is that its two leaders are at each other's throats and you have the opportunity to turn that against the cult or to just kind of sneak by them and leave. But it's got quite a bit of flexibility and a lot of different endings. So that's another interesting, more of a suspense game than anything else. I think it has a couple of horror adjacent plot arcs, but I wouldn't call it as a whole a horror game.
Yeah, there's also he also wrote a really, really fantastic book on game design several years ago. That is definitely worth reading if anybody is interested on that. Honestly, one of the games that I really like to talk about from a horror perspective is one day, it doesn't have to be today, is The Darkness.
Darkness. I do know of that. Is that the one where you can watch all of To Kill a Mockingbird?
Yes.
Okay. That I have been meaning to rewatch that,
I mean, you can watch it in the darkness. I'm not saying that is what you should do. I think it's really cool that you can. The Darkness is really cool. Obviously, it's a surprisingly effective horror game from that era is Prey. Human Head Prey.
The original Prey, not the 2017 one.
Also a big fan of You Will Die Here Tonight, which is a more recent release. So there's no shortage of good horror games.
How recent?
Maybe last year or the year before, I want to say. Halloween 23.
Okay, I don't know if this... I saw something in Steam as I was typing in You Will Die Here Tonight, but I misread it. The game is called Fuck You Witch. I thought it said You Will Fuck a Witch. And I was like, okay, I'm intrigued.
Wow. Learning so much about Brogan. Really, just that he puts up with you is crazy.
Is there anything of the, PS1 or even older going to, the SNES era that is good material? Like, PS1, obviously, you have, the Resident Evils... And I think the first Silent Hill.
Yeah, Silent Hill 1.
Done Clock Tower, the SNES one on the podcast before, but I don't know any other of the 16-bit era that is known as being a flat out horror game. Horror themed maybe, but not scary.
There's a bunch. I mean, there's Parasite Eve, right?
Yeah.
Which is a classic. A game that I really deeply love. There's original Silent Hill, Clock Tower. There's Hell Knight, Dino Crisis. Are we talking about 16 or are we talking about the PS1 era?
I was talking 16-bit, but yeah, PS1. I acknowledge that a lot of horror games on that.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I guess you could go PC games of the 90s. Things like Shiver or Quest for Glory 3 are again horror themed. But not explicitly scary.
Yeah, I 16-bit horror kind of begins and ends with Sweet Home and Clock Tower. Yeah, I definitely think that the CD-ROM era is kind of what kickstarted, at least on console. But the CD-ROM era is really when you saw that big explosion of horror in video games, because there was so much more data to play with, and which meant there was a lot more room for story and presentation. This is entirely anecdotal at this point. I would need to actually sit down and do some research to reinforce the point. But I definitely think that with that additional storage media from the CD-ROM period, you saw more creepy stuff coming out, like Seventh Guest, and that eventually gave rise to the survival horror resurgence of the mid-90s. So I think on the SNES you don't get that many, especially pre-ESRB, you don't get that many creepy games, but you get a lot in the PlayStation era.
Yeah, I think horror as a genre doesn't really come into its own in games until the mid-90s. With, the enhanced processing power, like obviously, you have stuff that's not like fully horror like Quake, right? But it's horror adjacent. And then you have like the games that became kind of genre defining in Resident Evil and Silent Hill, and a little bit later you had Fatal Frame and Parasite Eve and stuff like that. You had little weird games like Blue Stinger. There's a lot of great horror out there. The Suffering, and it's funny how much of it has survived and how much of it hasn't. Like in film, horror is largely an indie genre that you can produce for very little money, but games development is expensive, and if you want to make a good horror game, it costs money. Unless it's very limited in scope. And so I think it's really fascinating to see like what has and hasn't worked in games from a horror standpoint.
Are there any like blind spots you two feel you have for like famous horror games you've just never gotten around to?
I've never played Siren, I don't think. Maybe I can't remember.
Right now I feel like most of my blind spots are stuff which came out recently. There was a while there where I was kind of obsessed with the idea that there are things you must play to call yourself a fan of the medium, and eventually I kind of gave that up as a lost cause, because, well, the thing is that you've only got so much time in your day, in your week, in your life, and so many of these games are designed to take up so much of it that the idea of 100 games you must play before you die is so much of a time investment compared to that in any other medium, that realistically the 100 games you should play before you die are the 100 games that you think you'd have the most fun with.
Look, you're allowed to construct your own canon of meaning.
Yeah. I definitely don't get a lot out of kind of the torture porn genre, which characterized a lot of games in the late PlayStation, early PS2 era. So I always wonder how much of that had to do with the general aesthetic of the first couple of Silent Hill games, especially the first one. That kind of rusty, bloody, industrial hell thing.
Like Manhunt.
Yeah. I own Manhunt 2 around here somewhere. I've never actually played it. I don't know. I'm having a hard... The first Manhunt has a couple of really good levels in it, and I think it's genuinely worth a look. The problem is eventually it turns into a shooter, and that's when a lot of the value drains out of it. When you're creeping around dark alleys, just stabbing crazy people to death with a shard of glass, that's when Manhunt really kind of sings. But then it just turns into sneaking up on people and shooting them.
Looking at
and like every Rockstar game, it has its own ideas about how its UI and controls should work, and they are not ideas that were run past any other functioning human.
I will say that like more recent stuff, I thought Saturnalia was really good.
Saturnalia slaps. I do an episode on Saturnalia.
Yeah, I'm actually a big fan of the original Evil Within. World of Horror is interesting. I mean, there's a ton of like really good stuff that's a little bit weird. Mouthwashing, obviously.
If we're getting into that like indie scene, there's like it's fire in any direction, and you'll hit something that would be worth playing. It would just require a lot more, I guess, forethought than just like plucking something out of history that is acclaimed outright.
I do. I beat Heartworm not that long ago, which came out this year, and I think that's worth a look.
Yeah,
it's definitely, if for no other reason than it's definitely drawing on different artistic inspirations and trying for a different overall mood than a lot of horror games.
I played that at PAX. That's the one that has like your gun is photography, right?
Yeah, although not in the Fatal Frame sense. It really does just treat it like a pistol from Resident Evil. But yeah, and you've got an old Polaroid, and that's your only real weapon.
Yeah, I would be interested in checking out something in like a Heartworm Crow Country, sort of like a retro revival thing. See how the modern age tries to recreate that feeling. I wasn't as hot on Crow Country as many others, but I think it's cute. And I'd definitely do a re-examination.
I think Heartworm is a really cool game. I would do an episode on Heartworm. I'd do an episode on anything, really. But the great thing is there's no shortage of like excellent horror games, right? So
yeah, there are a lot of people who are capable of making a game by themselves now. And horror is such an inherently subjective genre that it's really been led to just a bumper crop of really interesting retro revivals. I mean, we could talk about Hollow Body.
Yeah.
Or there was a game I played not that long ago called Look Outside.
Brogan loves Look Outside. That's like his game of the year so far. Last I talked to him.
Well, it's just too bad that Alma killed him, or we could set that up right now.
Yeah. Speaking of, we probably should talk about F.E.A.R.
Yeah. We can move on to it. We have put forward our deliberations. We shall dwell and think. You, the listener, let us know what we should play next year. But let's move on to the game of the week. Our game of the week is F.E.A.R, released in 2005 by Monolith Productions, the makers of Blood, No One Lives Forever, and the Shadow of Mordor games. The game started as an attempt to create FPS gameplay that would resemble the action scenes from The Matrix and Hard Boiled. To accomplish this, they focused on particle effects, lighting, and enemy AI that would be highly reactive to the player's actions and gunfire. As development went on, elements of the mid-2000s Japanese horror boom, such as Ringu and The Grudge, started to seep into the production design. The story takes place in an alternate future of 2025, where corporate research into paranormal abilities led to the creation of the F.E.A.R unit, First Encounter, Assault, and Recon. You play the newest recruit, the unnamed Point Man, just as F.E.A.R is called on to track down a psychic operative named Paxton Fettel, who has hijacked an army of clone soldiers to strike back at his creators. Also, there's a creepy ghost girl running around as well. So, Will, you recommended F.E.A.R for this year's Halloween episode. What made you do that?
So F.E.A.R is the first game that really scared me. I mean, really scared me. I played it for the first time at a friend of mine. He lives in Virginia, and my mom and I would go stay with his family for a couple weeks every summer because she was very close with his mom, and I was very close with him. And we'd just hang out. And one year, and I think I would have been about 14 because it had just come out, F.E.A.R we turned off the lights and he had it on his computer and he's like, let me show you something. And we played F.E.A.R. And F.E.A.R scared me so bad that I could not sleep. And at one point I fell out of my chair during one of the really iconic sequences that I'm sure we're going to talk about. And and I didn't know, because I've played it since then, but I didn't really know how I was going to feel going back to it for this episode with just like a, kind of like a, I want to be able to talk about it mindset. And I'm really happy to say that I think it holds up and it is still really, really creepy. Horror games don't scare me as much. Horror in general just doesn't scare me as much. I'm older now. But that was 20 years ago. But I do think that the way F.E.A.R is designed is really, really smart. It's really unique. There's nothing else really like it, which is weird because horror is a genre of imitation, right? Where somebody makes Resident Evil and everybody wants to make Resident Evil. Somebody makes, like Silent Hill, and there's a million games that are referencing Silent Hill. But there's nothing else that's like F.E.A.R. And even the sequels really aren't like the original game in a lot of ways. It's kind of this unique thing that Monolith made, and they made it one time. And every attempt to recreate it has not worked, with the exception of maybe Extraction Point, which is the very first expansion for that game, which is now considered not canon. But I think it's this really fascinating blend of really really well made, really intense action and also like horror that F.E.A.R kind of walks this really interesting line of, usually when you give the character a gun, the game is not scary anymore because you can shoot the bad thing. It doesn't matter that you have a gun in F.E.A.R. The horrors persist regardless, and I think that's a really, really clever way to make a horror game where you are, as the player character, extremely powerful. And just everything about that game's design, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit, just there's nothing else like it, and it sticks with me. Like, I still remember that night very vividly the first time I played it.
What about you, Thomas? What's your experience with F.E.A.R?
Well, I realized when I was playing the first game for this podcast that I hadn't actually played the first game. For some reason, I'd played through and beaten the second and third games. And by the second, I mean Project Origin. I had never actually gone back and played the first one because it came out right when I was starting to really crack into writing about video games for money. And so I felt like I knew more about it than I'd actually gotten through hands-on experience. It's definitely a game that I think of every time somebody talks about helplessness in a horror, because as Will just touched on, you are, by any measure, one of the more powerful protagonists in first-person shooters in F.E.A.R, because you've got this super mode where you go into adrenaline overdrive and then go into slow motion for short periods of time, which is always accompanied by all of the humans you're up against going, oh shit, as they watch you suddenly accelerate into flash speed. And so you can just mow down battalions in F.E.A.R if you're careful about it. But at the same time, it's a game that is very careful to consistently acknowledge that you are also up against forces which you are effectively helpless against. One of the first things you see in the original F.E.A.R is a squad of your allies who are just as well equipped and well armored as you are, and they have been smeared across a warehouse parking lot like peanut butter by an enemy you never even saw.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of this standalone argument about not necessarily the value of helplessness in a horror gaming experience, but an argument about what helplessness actually entails. Because you're not helpless in F.E.A.R by any stretch of the imagination, but you are helpless when it counts, and it feels earned, because they set the stakes very carefully very early on.
Yeah. I guess I'll have to be something of the heel of this episode. This is my first time playing F.E.A.R. I didn't even know what really F.E.A.R was about. I'd seen the box art in stores tons of times. But I didn't know that this was like Hard Boiled meets The Ring. And I'll say, when it comes to the actual like shooting, the shootouts, I can't think of any FPS that has shootouts like this game does. Like, popping upon a squad of enemies and hitting that slow-mo button and just starting to pop as many heads as you can, and the blood is flying everywhere, the sparks, the smoke, the particle effects go crazy. I don't know how they were like putting this on like the original Xbox 360 back in the day. And then it just comes to, I wasn't all that spooked by the actual horror sections. And it meant that anytime I wasn't shooting a man in this game, the score kind of tanked for me.
Wood chipper. We're putting you in the contraption, dog.
Look, it's
why don't you go sit over there with your invisible cat girls and the real men can talk about F.E.A.R.
It's just the I think I would like the horror elements more if it wasn't a case of half the game is John Woo action and half the game is The Ring, but those two halves never really meet together on a gameplay level. You're either doing haunted house or you're doing shootouts. Now, everything I say in criticism of the game comes with this huge asterisk that is, except for Extraction Point, which I finished earlier today, and Extraction Point is great. I wish more of the game was like Extraction Point.
It's odd that both of you have talked. I haven't played Extraction Point. It's odd that both of you were talking about how much you liked it, because I was taking the opportunity for this podcast to look up something that I've been kind of curious about for a long time, which is how Extraction Point and Perseus Mandate are both kind of this abortive plot line for F.E.A.R, because those are the two games that were made by the original publisher after Monolith got bought by WB Games. Mm-hmm. So F.E.A.R 2 Project Origin ignores both of those completely. They're effectively a dead plot.
I mean, very common for mid-2000s horror franchises to just have, like, the sequel that is then outright ignored in favor of what comes after, you know?
Ironically, I think Extraction Point specifically has a better story than F.E.A.R 2 or F.E.A.R 3. But I think it's interesting that it doesn't work for you, because the horror in F.E.A.R works for me, like, because it's claustrophobic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess we can talk about the plot. You know, you set us up with, like, the whole you're going after Baxton Fettle thing, but, like, the other thing about F.E.A.R is Alma, right? And this little girl, red dress, you don't know who she is, and she just appears. And when she appears, you know, your radio gets staticky, lights go out, she just watches you. Sometimes she shows up and people explode. You know, she runs out at you from under desks. The moment that really, the one that got me the first time I played it was when you get on a ladder and then she's just there at the top of the ladder staring at you. Mm-hmm. Damn near fell out of my chair the first time.
The one that got me earlier today was relatively early on, when you jump into a broken grate in the floor and you land in a completely different building with bloody footprints on the floor ahead of you, and it sounds like there's somebody is giving birth somewhere ahead of you, but as no matter how far you go, the hallway just keeps repeating.
Yeah. I won't contest that the scares aren't, like, well done, and they're never repetitive. It's never the same scare twice. I guess just for me, a lot of them felt telegraphed, like, oh, this is where a scare is going to pop up. There are two that got me pretty bad. One is when you're in the office building and you're passing by this dark cubicle and Alma just, like, spider crawls at you suddenly and vanishes.
Yeah.
That got me pretty bad.
Yep.
The other one is when you're in a security office calling an elevator, and she just appears behind, like, the glass pane. And I said to myself, I'm going to walk out this room, and she's not going to be there. No, she is there, and she starts walking at you, and that completely threw me off guard, and I fired at her 3 times with the shotgun, and no effect.
Yeah, I think, there, and I know people who don't think fear is scary, and that's fine. I think a large part of it is not, like, jump scary, right? I think what works for me is fear is just constantly tense. You are in these really tight environments. It's dark all the time. The enemies that can hurt you, right? The replica soldiers that Paxton Fettel commands, like, they can appear basically from anywhere, and they do. Everything in Fear makes noise. If you hit a desk, the things on it are going to rustle. If you step on a soda can that's on the floor, it's going to make noise. Sometimes the normal transmissions in your radio have static in them, which is what teaches you to look for Alma, because when she appears, there's static on the radio first. Everything about that game is put into place to make you constantly and on the lookout for something.
Yeah, it's definitely a game where even when it's not a sequence which is intended as necessarily what you might call a horror sequence, it's always lit and designed and scored like a horror game. The soundtrack is always very low-key and very droning and just kind of sneaks up on you when it's there. Everything is kind of... it's got the world's worst flashlight.
I know. Why 2025, we gotta be getting better, like, do they not have Energizer?
I'm blaming Alma.
Listen, there is a mod that you can have called the Echo mod, and if anybody is listening to this and hasn't played Fear or hasn't played Fear in a long time and wants to go back and replay it, especially on PC, you can play it on backwards compatibility through Xbox, but I think there was also a PS3 release, if I'm remembering correctly. But if
the
you play
PS3 release was notoriously pretty bad. So if you're going to play this game in 2025, it's PC or through backwards compatibility on Xbox.
Yeah, and the backwards compatibility does work really well. My wife played it that way last year. But if you're going to play it, I highly recommend getting it on PC. You can get it for like $2, maybe, when it goes on sale. And there's something called the Echo mod. It's very easy to install. It's literally just dragging a few files into the Steam directory, and it just makes the game a lot better. And one of the things that you can turn on in the Echo mod is Infinite Flashlight. However, if you turn on the Infinite Flashlight, I'm judging you. Not because I don't agree with the argument that, like, flashlights don't run out of battery that fast. Like, hey, I'm with you. But on the other hand, like, it's a very specific kind of design. There's a hallway in Fear where it's completely dark, and you have to go down it. And if you start your flashlight the instant you have to start walking down that hallway, it will run out halfway through. Very specific kinds of design go into how long that flashlight battery lasts, which is another thing that I think really kind of sets Fear apart. I know people don't like the flashlight in Doom 3. I can't hold my weapon. You can hold your weapon and use the flashlight. It's just not going to last forever. And the other thing is that, like, the enemy AI in Fear, Murph brought it up, is exceptional. The gunplay in that game, to this day, I don't think there's a shooter that plays better than Fear does. Like, the act of firing a gun in that game is amazing.
When you have, I've mentioned on the podcast before, I judge an FPS a lot by whether or not I like the submachine gun, because normally I don't use the submachine gun at all in FPSs. In this game, if you corner a guy and you hit the slowdown and you just unload on him, watching the blood splatter and, like, each individual limb spasm out as he is dying, like, that is such a cool visual. I can't say I've seen anywhere in another FPS before.
You ever listen to yourself while you're having conversations about this kind of thing?
Sometimes. We are recording for a podcast.
I'm glad somebody else said it. I think, yeah. I guess I'm gonna do it myself too. I think the shotgun in that game feels amazing.
Yes.
It's one of the all-time FPS shotguns. You pull the trigger and people just disappear. Like there's a level of like reactivity and fear to what you do that I really appreciate. You know, you can literally blow people into pieces. You can, you know, separate limbs from torsos. You can do all this stuff. Like if you hit something, it will fall over right in the environment. You know, if you blow the glass in slow motion, it has this really beautiful shatter effect that's a reference to the Matrix, specifically like the lobby fight scene near the end of the film. Like F.E.A.R is so deliberate in everything that it does. Everything is thoughtful. Everything feeds into itself. And so what I think the elements for me that really make it effective are like that you know, moment of like, oh my God, I'm so powerful. Like these dudes cannot stop me. And then Alma shows up, or Fettel shows up, or you have a vision of something, or someone is, you know, walking down a hallway just out of your reach, and you are reminded that you are not that important in the grand scheme of this. You are not that powerful. There is stuff going on here that is beyond you, and it doesn't matter that you basically can go into bullet time whenever you want, and it doesn't matter how good the shotgun is. Like, you are out of your depth here, and that never becomes less creepy or like on the back of your neck, right? Where you feel it and you're like, fuck, I don't want to go down this hallway because I can't deal with whatever is there.
The enemy AI is interesting because it's like famous, right? It's like, oh, they created the most powerful AI ever for F.E.A.R. But it's actually just like a lot of very clever level design and just sort of tricks, right? Like, I think one of the most important ones is that the clone soldiers are constantly talking, right? And they'll call out your position. And they'll specifically, like, distinguish he's behind a couch or he's behind a sofa. Whether you're behind a couch or a sofa, it would have been so easy to just say, that's a couch, right? And it makes it feel like you are actively, like, you're playing a game of cat and mouse. They are reacting to your positions just as you are reacting to theirs. And the fact that so much of the level design are kind of these, like, office spaces, these warehouses, where you can't really, like, bottleneck anything. You're always going to have an open door, sometimes two open doors behind you, that enemies can loop around and, you know, come at you from all sides in. While you're focused on one dude, his buddy's moving into a better position to take you out. Or they're corralling you to throw a grenade in. That stuff's all really exceptional.
Yeah, they were absolutely working on that as a big bullet point for the game. It was something that was a big thing in No One Lives Forever, which is one of their previous games, and the sequel to that. So when F.E.A.R came along, they were making a deliberate effort to make AI-driven enemies that were going to be genuinely challenging rather than just kind of hiding behind chest-high walls all day. And even now, they are impressively reactive in a way that most modern games don't even try to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's, like, for me, replaying F.E.A.R was a large part of, like, the staggering ambition of it. Like, because it is staggeringly ambitious. As the best gunplay you've ever experienced in your life, the sound design is amazing. The AI is really, really smart. The level design is complementing the AI at every turn. It's scary. Like, it is doing so much. The way it tells its story is interesting because F.E.A.R is a mystery. You don't know what's going on for half of the story. You have no idea. And a lot of that story is told to you in computer files and logs and, you know, voiceover and stuff that you can easily miss. And you're trying to put together this very limited set of information that you have with a character that doesn't speak, doesn't, like, and nobody else seems to recognize, like, oh, dude, like, there's this creepy little girl walking around here. What the fuck is going on? Everything about it kind of works together to build this sense of atmosphere, this sense of, like, place and perspective, and make it unlike other things.
That's actually something I came to really appreciate playing through it this time, is that you never really run into information in F.E.A.R that isn't delivered in a way that feels unnatural or expository. It's all voicemail messages and conversations on the radio from people who are just as much in the dark as you are. For example, reactions from your mission control to the data you're sending them from the laptop, and they will comment on it like, this is why that's important. And Vel feels surprisingly natural in a genre where most of the exposition tends to be delivered via the fact that everybody in this universe is a compulsive diarist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got done with the IGN guide for Silent Hill F, which has hundreds of documents, and so many of them are just somebody bothering to write down something that they have no particular reason to write down aside from the fact that they are journaling, or even then they're just making a note to themselves for no particular reason. Let me just leave an exhaustive list of the single worst crime I have ever committed in my life and why I did it. And then I will leave it out in the open on the porch of a completely disconnected house on the other side of town. And it made me think, what would a game look like if nobody did this shit? Because that is one of the weird little details from the original Resident Evil that has just snuck in and become a bedrock of horror in gaming. And it turns out it looks a lot like the first F.E.A.R.
Yeah, and I think it does a really good job of communicating sense of place, right? When you go into an office, like, you hear about Genevieve a lot, who's the CEO of Armacam, who, we're going to talk about the story in a minute, I guess, but she's in a lot of voicemails. And finally, you hear her, and you're like, oh, I'm in this guy's office, because this is a voicemail to this person. Okay. And then you get to her office, and you don't really realize it's her office, even though it's a big office. It has chairs, like multiple chairs in front of her desk. Like, it looks like the office of someone who's important in the company. And then you see a message on the phone, and you hit the phone, and it's, hi, Genevieve, and you're like, oh, this is her office. This is where I am. Like, it does a really great job of showing you what place is. Like, these are real environments, right, that you could conceivably see people navigating in everyday life. And I think it's a really cool thing to do because, Thomas, you're right. Like, a lot of stuff is exposition for the player, and if you know how to look for that, like, as a writing technique, you see it all the time, and you're like, nobody would ever say this in the universe because it's not, all these characters know what this is, right? This character does not need to tell these other characters what's going on. It's for the benefit of the player, for the reader, the viewer, right? But F.E.A.R. doesn't do that. F.E.A.R. is willing to let you miss things. They're really important. You can miss computer terminals. You can miss seeing Alma. Like, there are places where you might hear the static and be like, huh, there's nothing there. And she's there. You just didn't see her. Like, it is a game that is so confident in its ability to deliver narrative and to deliver spooks and to deliver, like, a sense of atmosphere that it doesn't care if you miss it. It doesn't force you to look at stuff, which I think is, again, really just staggeringly ambitious because modern games don't do that. They force you to look. F.E.A.R. is like, nah, we got this. If you miss this, that's not a big deal. We think you'll get the rest of it.
And I think F.E.A.R. derives some of its confidence in that by virtue of being extraordinarily dense that way. There isn't a lot of empty space in this game. There is usually something to fill up everywhere. And so even if you miss half the laptops or half the voicemail messages, the other half will get you a pretty long way towards figuring out what you want to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of, like, the placement of everything is so careful and so thoughtful and so detailed. And again, like, these conversations feel like real conversations that people would have, right? Where they talk about, like, opening the vault. It's like, I fucking told you not to do this. Maybe, like, next time you'll listen to me, right? But these conversations feel like conversations that people would have and that, reactions that people would have to things. And I think the other thing that's really unique is, like, the story. And I guess, can we talk about the story now? Is that cool? I love F.E.A.R.'s plot because it's really not standard for a horror game. And I'm writing a piece about this for Rolling Stone, but what's really fascinating to me is the way that in the years since it came out, Alma has been, like, perceived as the villain of the story, right? Because she's the scary monster. But she's not, really. Like, none of this is her fault. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, she's a victim in the same way that, like, Sadako in The Ring is a victim.
But it's not even... It's different than that, because Sadako kills somebody. Alma is... This is done to her.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, what causes the events of The Ring is because she does kill someone. Alma's problem is that she's psychic, and the company wants to make money. There are very few games... and it's funny because we're doing another podcast about this over at Skybox, where we're actually our skydive for this month is F.E.A.R. Kind of lined up very nicely. And I was talking to Lucas about it, and I said, I forgot how deeply anti-capitalist this game is, because it is. The bad guy of F.E.A.R. is Armacham. It's not Alma. It's not even Fettel, really. Like, they're both victims. They do bad stuff because of what's done to them, but they're not, like... They don't...
They're dangerous, but they aren't malevolent.
Yeah, they're not malevolent, right? They're very targeted in what they do.
Yeah, and the problem is, to get what they want, they have to do things which are illegal, and it's just your shit luck that it's your job to enforce the law.
Well, it's also, like... really interesting from a perspective of, like, I guess we have to sum up F.E.A.R.'s plot. Murph, do you want to do this? Do you want me to do it?
I mean, you can do it. I kind of gave my little synopsis at the start. When it comes to the story itself, I guess I am missing... I feel like I need more context for what exactly an alternate history 2025 where psychic powers are being researched by corporations looks like. Because at the start, you do have your guy in your squad who's like, no one takes the F.E.A.R. unit seriously. But to an extent, it feels like the F.E.A.R. unit is unprepared for what they go into.
Well, they're new, right? And they're fairly new.
It says established in 2002 at the start.
Well, I mean, 20 years for, like, how much paranormal stuff is there really? And their job is not to deal with psychics, it's paranormal stuff. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the plot just so people can follow along, because we're using a lot of proper nouns here.
Sure.
So you get this, you're signed to the F.E.A.R. unit, you get this call. Paxton Fettel has seized command of this army of basically clone super soldiers that is designed to be commanded by a psychic commander, and he is looking for something, and you don't know what it is. And there's also this little girl in the red dress who... At one point, like, you find that Fettel has been eating people as he kills them, and one of the guys survives long enough to warn you about somebody named Alma. You don't know who that is. So you're chasing Fettel. And throughout the whole game, you were having these really crazy hallucinations, either of Fettel or of this little girl. And, Fettel's like, hey, you don't know who you are. Like, you have no idea what this is about. And you also have this recurring hallucination of, like, a hospital, someone's in labor, the child is taken away, and the woman screams. Again, you don't know what this is. And as you go, you learn that the woman in question is Alma, who is the little girl. And you also learn that she had 2 children. One of them is the first prototype, one of them is the second prototype. First prototype is deemed a failure. They do something with it, you don't know what. Fettel's the second one. Successful, right? And the purpose of this thing that Armacham was doing, it's the company that is responsible for all this, was to create psychic commanders for their super soldiers. You eventually learn that they did this by having this little girl, whose name was Alma, who was a psychic. They'd been experimenting on her since she was 3 years old. And at age 8, because they were so scared of her psychic powers, they locked her in this thing called the Vault and put her in a coma. So they could study her without them worrying about, hey, she's, like, giving our researchers really horrific nightmares and mood swings, and the only reason we think she hasn't done worse is because she's a kid. So they do that. She stays in the Vault for 8 years. When she's 15, she is forcibly impregnated with DNA from all the people who work at Armacam and the research thing, including her father, who's the head of the program.
Yeah, that was messed up.
Gives birth to a son, who again is the first prototype fails. Then they do it again for Fettel. When Fettel is 10 years old, he psychically connects with Alma. She basically possesses him, and he kills several people. You also learn that, like, hey, when she gives birth, she's supposed to be still in the induced coma. She wakes up as they're taking away her children. So you can understand how angry she is, right? After that, they shut the program down. They pull her life support. And she dies in the vault. The problem is, she's basically too angry and powerful to die, so she becomes, like, this spirit of psychic vengeance. And Armacam, the thing that kicks all this off, is at the beginning of the game, they decide they're going to reopen that facility and see if they can use it and restart the program. And when they do, they wake her up. And everything that follows is basically Alma being like, fuck these people, I'm going to kill each and every one of them. So she gets in touch with Fettel, takes command of the thing, and he is looking for her. Eventually, you learn all this. You also learn that, hey, you're her other son, by the way. That's why you can do all this special stuff. Because at one point, she looks at you through that glass in that one scene and says, I know who you are. And it's also important to notice that after that point, like after she figures out who you are, because the first time you run into her, she does try to kill you. There's a big explosion. After that, she never tries to hurt you again because she figures out who you are. All the stuff that happens, she just watches you. She might walk towards you. She might run at you, creepy spider crawl from under her stairs, but she never actually tries to hurt you again. And the only time that she does is once you chase them to the vault, and her father in this moment of like conscious is like, I think my daughter suffered enough, decides to let her out, and she kills him immediately. Is when she tries to give you a hug near the end of the game. But she is a psychic spirit of vengeance. Touching you is fatal, so you have to shoot at her.
In retrospect, there are a lot of stories in the latter half of the 20th century, especially in that intersection point between science fiction and horror, which is about some goofy Cold War project going wrong in this precise measurement. You know, we were trying to do this crazy thing as part of a weapon of war, and it got out. And fear strikes me as, and again, this is something I would want to research, but it strikes me as one of the first times where the people doing this crazy weapon of war research are doing so just for profit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this isn't
like Umbrella Corporation and Resident Evil, at least the first three before they retconned it into this weird like cult thing. But like their whole thing with like Raccoon City was, well, the city had to get nuked, but we got a lot of data that we can sell to investors.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about it is like obviously, right, it's not the first example, but like Armacam is explicitly a military contractor. That's what they do, right? And so they have a private army, basically. And they have been training these psychic commanders to fund their private army so they can sell it. And this whole thing is literally built on the back of corporate greed and people being like, we can do this, it's fine. And then after it spectacularly backfires and you have to basically close the project, put the test subject down, and you know that something really bad is in that facility, and you open it up anyway, again, because you think you can salvage it and make money. Like, you get to the end of F.E.A.R. and you're like, Alma has never done anything wrong in her life. This is completely rational. Every single person involved with this project deserves to die. And while you're trying to figure out what the fuck is going on, the company is furiously trying to cover it up. They kill one of their own employees who's talking to you. They send their security team after you.
Those who deliberately go back to Omelas.
Yeah, like like Armacam's evil, right? Like the monster of F.E.A.R. is not Alma or even Fettel, although Fettel is probably actually worse than she is because like he's indiscriminate. He'll just kill everybody. Like Alma has multiple chances to kill every single member of your unit. She has multiple chances to kill her sister. She walks into an elevator with her sister while she's going to try to find her dad. Doesn't kill her. Fettel kills her. Alma leaves her alone. And it's really fascinating to me that in the years since F.E.A.R came out, like, the discussion has been about how scary Alma is and, like, big evil psychic ghost. And it's like, and part of that is because of what happens in later games. But, like, if you look at the original F.E.A.R, like, it's very clear who the bad guys are. And, like, how what she does is targeted. Because, again, she could kill everybody in that facility whenever she wanted to, and she doesn't. She's very targeted in who she goes after, which feels pretty unique to me. And it's weird to see in the years since about, like, how everything about F.E.A.R is, like, Alma scary, Alma big bad, right? And not, like, no, it's actually the company.
I wonder how much of that has to do with the simple fact that people don't tend to finish video games.
I think that's part of it. I think it's also part of, like F.E.A.R has kind of dropped out of the cultural consciousness a little bit because F.E.A.R 3 is a bad game. It goes in really weird places. F.E.A.R 2 is kind of a miss. It's not terrible, but it's not great.
Yeah, I looked up the history of the series just for this podcast because, like I said, I've been curious about it for a long time. And it is a wonder that we're still talking about this at all.
Yeah, because the rest of the series kind of like... Except for Extraction Point. Extraction Point is actually good and takes the story in, like, a really interesting direction where, like, Alma is allowed to have at least some, like, sense of more of a character and like this kind of, like, sense of, like, healing and redemption that is not offered to her in any other game.
Well, we can't have that be canon.
No, right? And, like, I think that's part of the reason that people still... Like, most everybody I know who's really into F.E.A.R will just tell you to play F.E.A.R 1, play Extraction Point, and then stop.
Yeah, I also played the Perseus Mandate. That's not good, by any definition. Basically, everything that is good in F.E.A.R and in Extraction Point isn't really found in Perseus Mandate, outside of, like, one pretty cool sequence when you're underground. But otherwise, I mean, number one, it just looks noticeably worse in every capacity. And also, F.E.A.R doesn't really work when you give you 2 squad mates.
Yeah, it's a really weird game.
You know what's kind of funny about Extraction Point and Perseus Mandate? I looked up the developer behind them, and it turns out that after 2 name changes, they're the current developers of World of Tanks.
What?
It's Timegate, yeah.
Well,
that's funny.
Huh.
But yeah, it's like, and so F.E.A.R's history is, like, really weird, right? Like, it's not like another, like, this is a very, like, fairly venerated horror game. And I think for a long time, if you would ask people what's Monolith's best known game, like, the response would have been F.E.A.R. Because it was a huge hit.
Yeah, F.E.A.R was a huge hit, and, I mean, it's definitely got a lot of DNA in common with the 2 Condemned games, especially when they're playing with just the surreal capacity of the first-person perspective.
Let me ask this. This game came out in the mid-2000s. The multiplayer FPS boom was huge, and this game had a multiplayer component. Was it, like, worthwhile in any way?
I remember it being pretty solid, but it was also, like, in that really weird thing where, like, GameSpy hosted the servers. So the multiplayer for this game straight up doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, okay.
In an official capacity, because it was run on the GameSpy servers. That's why GameSpy is in the credits. But yeah, it's very much like the gameplay of the original. If you think, like, the gunplay in F.E.A.R is good, imagine that as a multiplayer game.
Well, I assume you don't have the slowdown powers at all.
I want to say that you did, but again, it's been so long that I don't remember. And it's not like you can fire it up and check.
Yeah. Huh. Now if it does have the slowdown, I've always wondered how that would work in a multiplayer capacity. Whether you do just see the other player suddenly, like, tap into the speed force and start blurring around.
Oh, apparently people have actually had workarounds for it. Interesting. You can actually still play it.
I have some, like, detractions about this game, but at the end of the day, I am really glad that we did play this because it is such an interesting and unique thing, especially compared to the time it's coming out. Like, going through the games of 2005 off the top of my head, and even after, there's nothing really like this, where the how do I want to phrase this? The horror is more cerebral and subtle, but the gunplay is more bombastic and splattery, right?
I definitely think that a lot of people will write F.E.A.R off as just being a carnival of jump scares. But if you give it half a chance, it's got a lot more going on than that, just by virtue of how it is much more carefully designed than people give it credit for. Like we were talking about how everything about it is specifically oriented to be unnerving, even when you are just doing John Woo shit.
I can't tell you how many times like you'll be playing F.E.A.R and there'll be a musical sting that like in another horror game would be like you are about to get jump scare and nothing happens. Like F.E.A.R is interesting because it plays with you. It plays with your expectations of what a game like this is going to be. And so much of the horror is so subtle. It's not like anything jumping out and attacking you. It's, hey, if you look really closely past that chain link fence, Alma's standing there and she's looking at you.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of how you can do a supercut of the original Half-Life of all of the scenes where the G-Man is somewhere looking at you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite scenes in F.E.A.R, I mentioned the ladder scene. Brogan mentioned the one coming out from under the desk. Those are the two that really get me. Every time that I was looking for the one coming out from under the desk, and it still got me. But one of the ones that I think is a really great just kind of summation of the game is you come into this large foyer in the Arcane building, and there's like couches, and you see Alma kind of knelt down next to this enormous pool of blood and bodies, and then she disappears. And the rest of the F.E.A.R crew shows up in that room, and you have like a kind of a meeting about like what's going on, right? You kind of reconnect about like, hey, where are we? What are we doing? What's the objective? Like, one of the coolest parts about that scene is she is in the balcony above you, just watching. Game does not call attention to that. She's just there, and if you look up, you'll see her. And then she disappears. And there are so many subtle things in F.E.A.R, which I think, like, when you talk about the combat, because it is big and loud and explosive, and you have so many guns, and some of the guns aren't subtle. There's the Type 7 particle weapon turns dudes into skeletons.
Yeah.
There's that kinetic penetrator that'll pin people straight to a wall if you land the kill shot and they're close enough to it.
Mm-hmm. The rocket launcher shoots 3 rockets at a time.
Yeah, look, I will never score a game low that lets me pin dudes to walls with projectiles. That is the Murph promise.
That is why you need to play the original Painkiller, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, Painkiller. Yeah, if you like the way that F.E.A.R.'s gunplay is, you need to play Painkiller. But I think what's really cool about that, right, is like neither one of those things feel at odds with each other. Like this really subtle, like very kind of like low-key horror against like these very loud action sequences, right, that are very John Woo, very The Matrix. Like it feels like these things should coexist in the same world, right? And like the power you feel in one doesn't necessarily connect to the other one because they're not the same. And there's this cool kind of push and pull with the weapons. When people are like, oh, F.E.A.R horror game, like, yes. And they're like, but is it a good shooter? I'm like, listen, you are not going to... And I again, I've said this before and on this podcast, I'll say it again. I think F.E.A.R is the best playing shooter I've ever played in my life. I don't think, from a gunplay perspective, anything feels that good. Still.
My one big criticism of F.E.A.R, and I go back and forth on whether or not I'm actually okay with this or not. I would like it if enemies died more conclusively, because it felt like I was always having a problem with them looking like they were dead and then just popping back up like nothing had happened.
Yeah, I think that's part of the, like, a lot of the AI tricks it does, where an enemy will sort of get their second wind and get back up and attack you, so you need to double tap.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, the way I always, like, tell people to think about it, and the way I've started to look for it is if they're holding a weapon, they're not dead.
Yeah.
As soon as they drop their gun, they're dead. Which is just one of those things you learn to recognize. But I do think it works. Like, I think that's actually pretty effective because you think like, oh, I've just hit this dude in the chest with a shotgun twice. Like, it looks like he's about to fall over. We're in slow motion. So you turn your attention to the other guy, and then you're getting shot from the side where you thought you'd taken care of somebody. And I think it like forces you to be a little bit more patient, a little more precise, a little make sure, like, is he dead? And I like that. I also really like that, like, F.E.A.R kind of encourages you to experiment, right? Like, it's and use your slow motion a lot. Like, it's never like save it, right? Because this is an old school shooter. Like, you've got health pickups, your reflex time is limited. There's armor pickups, right? So, like, you can come out of a firefight in really bad shape. I think it's really difficult to, like, get to a point where you can't progress in F.E.A.R. It's fairly generous with items, but you do have to be like, all right, I can only carry 3 guns. What do I want with me? How am I going to approach this encounter? When should I spend my slow motion? You have like 3 different types of grenades. Like, it really enforces you or encourages you to use your whole arsenal and to approach the combat in like really subtle ways. Because there are a lot of places where you can start the combat encounter from a vent. You can sneak up behind a guy. Like, you don't have to have these big bombastic loud fight scenes all the time.
One time I stuck a sticky grenade to a guy and then drop kicked him into his friends and detonated it.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's definitely got some of the best feeling grenades I've played in recent memory.
Although I don't know what you call it, that ripple effect in the air when the grenades go off. Love that. Looks great.
Yeah, that impact wave.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking earlier about branch points when we were discussing Ninja Gaiden, and it struck me playing this that there is a lot in F.E.A.R in particular, which feels like, again, it's another branch point. That if not for all of the chaos about the rights, which led to F.E.A.R 2 and 3 being so divisive / flawed / bad, that this would be a lot more influential on the medium than it turned out to be. Because by virtue of, as I mentioned in the beginning, being a one-game counter-argument to the point of games aren't scary if you have a competent or well-armed player character. Whereas F.E.A.R has a lot going for it, despite the fact that you are a one-man shit-wrecking army. Because sometimes there's shit you just can't shoot, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, like, even it plays with that, right? Because the moment when you do have to shoot Alma, because you do have to shoot her at the end when she's reaching for you, because otherwise she'll kill you, is you've never had to shoot her before.
Yeah, well, never deliberately. I mean, like I said, that one time she got me near the elevator, I definitely popped a few rounds at her, but they did nothing. And so I learned, right. No point shooting from this point forward.
Yeah, but the entire rest of the game, right, has spent its runtime teaching you there's no point in shooting at her because you can't hurt her.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end, it throws one last trick at you. And it's like, actually, you do have to fire now. At the end, where you kind of like feel like, oh man, this feels bad, right? Like, there's no malice here, but I have to fire at her because otherwise she will kill me. And the game is kind of designed around that moment being something that you're going to have to play twice. Because you have to shoot at her a bunch to make her go away. And the only way you're going to have enough time to do it is if you start firing pretty quickly after she starts walking towards you. Otherwise, you are not going to get enough bullets in her to make her go away.
Yeah.
And the only reason you would know when to fire there is if you've died.
I had to do that twice.
Yeah. Like, I knew it was coming, and I just wanted to see it. Like, I wanted to see the scene both ways. So I let her kill me, and then I did the scene again. But, like, everything about it is so thoughtfully made. Right down to that moment where they know you're probably going to have to do it twice. And the game is kind of designed around that. Like, even from where the checkpoint is. Like, because you're checkpointed right there. Like, maybe 15 seconds before that happens. And it's I don't know. It plays with like the expectations of the player in a really interesting way, in a really thoughtful way. And the other thing, you know, and I think, Murph, you mentioned this earlier, is it never pulls the same scare on you twice.
No, like you'll wind up in that hospital hallway a few times, but each time you're there, it's a different like visual you're being given. Like it's full of blood now, or it starts stretching, or it's upside down once, I think.
Mm-hmm. Or she's walking towards you, or you're walking towards her, or, you know, like, it's always subtly different. And, like, in the game, when you see Alma, it's never, like, you see her at the top of that ladder once, and then it never happens again. She comes out at you from the cubicle once, and it never happens again. But it's always in the back of your mind, like, oh, shit, she can be anywhere. So every time, the first time you play that game, every time you go down into the ladder, you're going to be like, oh, man, is she going to do it again?
Mm-hmm.
Because you already know that she can, right? And that's the brilliance of it. It pulls it once. It realizes that it's an incredible trick once. And because of that, on replays, unless you remember exactly where that moment is, it's going to get you. Same thing with the desk. Unless you remember exactly where you are, it's going to get you again.
Desk.
Yeah. Because it happens once. And I think, like, you know, that's such a, like, you would not think F.E.A.R, I think, would be a game that kind of understands that, like, need for subtlety, need for, like, all right, we got to have a restraint here. We can't just, you know, throw jump scares at you. But it does. And the game is so much better for it. And so many horror games are like, you know, we're going to do a jump scare. We want to keep you scared. And F.E.A.R is an argument for, like, the scariest thing is not the jump scare. It's the anticipation of the jump scare. It's the recognition that it could happen again. And you're in this tight hallway, you don't have a flashlight, you know, she can be anywhere, and then the static comes on your radio, and you're like, fuck, where is she? And that is more terrifying than, like, actually seeing her do something, or seeing Fettel do something. Like, the anticipation that something will happen, and F.E.A.R plays with that really beautifully.
Well, I think that's the best closing note we can end this Halloween horror podcast on. Will, as of late, where can people find your work?
You can always find me on IGN.com. I'm usually there once or twice a month, sometimes more often than that. I will be having a review for the new Painkiller up soon. I just reviewed Bounty Star, very personal review for me, so, you know, if you like kind of personal games writing, I'd recommend that. Also, you can find me on Blue Sky at Edgar Allan Bro, and you can find my other stuff and the site that I run over at skyboxcritics.com. We are fully reader supported, and you know, if you have a couple of dollars to kick our way, awesome. If you don't, then I'd really appreciate it. You just, you know, reading the site and maybe
yeah, you heard it here first.
I don't even know what I said. It wasn't shit. It was like some combination
shite,
of
like you
shite. Reading the shite.
Suddenly you were Irish for just long enough to embarrass yourself.
Yeah. If you could, you know, if you like what we do on the site, just sharing it helps a lot. So that's me.
And Thomas, what about thee?
Well, I do a lot of work for GeekWire here in Seattle as their video game correspondent, so to speak. And I have been doing a lot recently for the guides on IGN for Silent Hill F, Ninja Gaiden 4, and the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection. You can also find my columns at the Minus World Vertical on a hard drive, which should be starting up soon. There's been some behind-the-scenes shenanigan, which has kept the entire site from being updated for a while, but we're hoping to iron that out pretty quick here. But that is where I do a lot of my indie reviews, which may end up somewhere else in the near future, but for right now, they are still on Minus World.
All right, and if you, the listener, want to listen more to the Daydream Cast, if you're not already a subscriber or you just stumbled across this for whatever reason, you can subscribe to us on Spotify or really anywhere that podcasts are had. You can also go on to our YouTube channel where we have video episodes of the podcasts up along with some bonus material, different sort of tier lists, rankings. There is a Let's Play if you want to hear more of interplay between me and Will. We went through Halo 3 with a full squad, and I cut those up into a super edit of any gag or goof that occurred to me in the moment of editing. It's probably, at the very least, in the top 3 things I put the most effort into this year.
You know, I kind of want to go through F.E.A.R 3 in co-op. I never actually did that back in the day.
Is that a co-op game?
It is only a co-op game.
Oh, like Dead Space 3.
It is the Dead Space 3 thing, and I think they came out the same year.
Yeah, there's a thing in its
Wikipedia.
2005, really early.
Oh, okay. So it's the year is
Oh,
F.E.A.R.
no, sorry.
No, that's 4. I'm sorry. 2009 was Resident Evil 5.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Dead Space, I think, is a couple years later than F.E.A.R. But yeah, it's a co-op game. You play as the Point Man and Paxton Fettel, who randomly comes back to life after you shoot him in the head.
Well, that's Extraction.
One thing that the canon and non-canon pass both agree on is that Paxton Fettel is eternal. But yeah, man, F.E.A.R 3 is a trip. It is not a good video game. But Thomas, if you want to do this, I will do it with you.
Look, I just like Paxton Fennell's line in Extraction Point where he shows up and says, "I know this doesn't make sense."
Right? Like, I like that they're having fun with it.
Yeah. No, dude, Extraction Point slaps. I'll stand by that. But yeah, I think we will close it out there.
Man, F.E.A.R, what a game. Go play it.